And so for a moment, let's just presence ourselves amid the presence that's always present deep within us and all around us. Therese had a funny way of taking the world by storm. For someone who wasn't known, there were only 30 people at her funeral. She had spent the last 9 years locked in the Carmel, never got out. Nobody knew her, but somehow it exploded in a lot of people. Somehow she said she was going to spend her life, her heaven. She didn't get what she wanted on earth. She was going to get it with heaven. And so somehow it did. And a lot of it was the Australian guys in World War II who came over, and finding in Normandy. That made her really famous and made her public. But she's a wonderful girl who always somehow wanted to be a saint. She understood that. Some people aren't. She, as many of you know, she's the last of 9 kids born to Zilly and Louis. One who wanted to be a priest, and the other wanted to be a nun, and they couldn't do either. And they met in a blind date, and she decided, that's my man. She ran the world. But one of the things she had to deal with, as we all do, is what is society, what is the church, what do they say about who God is and what spirituality is about? And what had permeated much of Catholicism, especially after the Protestant Reformation, was Jansenism. Jansenism is really a heresy of the church. It's that God is really upset and angry, and that's why he punishes you. You're never going to keep him happy, but you better work hard at it anyway. That kind of stuff. And it produced a lot of scrupulosity, because it finally said, and see, the clerics get over that and say, we'll tell you what to do. And if you do what we say, and suddenly they have your conscience and they run the world, that kind of thing. And they did. And of course, remember, France was very anti-clerical, because in the French Revolution, they had the first, second, and third estates, and then there were the people. Well, the church was the first estate, because most of the bishops and stuff were all sons of dukes, and it was kind of more of a political position. So the church was on the side of the monarchy, during the Revolution. And the simple people of the world never got over that. Why are you suddenly siding with them against us? When we were trying to, what the American Revolution had, that every human being has a dignity and needs to be respected and learned and have some say-so. So as she comes into the world in that environment, and you got a defensive church, nervous because people didn't like it, or, thought it was very anti-clerical and anti-religious kind of stuff. But one of the things about Therese, the family pushed spirituality, and no doubt about it. The fact that of the 5 that lived, all of them became nuns. I always think that was strange, And but anyway, one of the things she said, and I want to go through it because there's a fascinating way in which God had to deal with her, is God has to do it all. God does all the work in sanctity, not us. We forget that. We've somehow decided it's all about me and what I'm doing, and I'll learn it, and I'll keep track of it so I can say, she always said, I'll come with empty hands. Although as a kid, remember, she was writing down everything, every little good work she did, every little prayer she said, all these little ejaculations and all this. She had books of it, and would share them with Celine every night. They'd share what good they did and impress people. We're going to impress God. So, because she learned, that's what Jansenism said. You got to earn it. You got to work it. You got to do all this stuff. But she eventually wrote, I always wanted to become a saint. But instead of being discouraged, I told myself that God would not make me wish for something impossible. I will look for some means going to heaven by a little way, which is very short and very straight. She wanted to get to the heart of things. She didn't want the long thing, because, a lot of spiritualities, when you read some of them, of some of the saints, including some of our Carmelite saints, it sounds like an obstacle course you'll never get through. You got to do this, you got to do that. It's amazing. Really? She gains, because she always had a spirituality of a child. We heard of the gospel today. That somehow she went to the heart of the issue. We don't need all these prayers. We don't need to keep talking God to death. We just need to cut through and just be very open with him and speak from your heart. She saw prayer as a burst of joy. Didn't take a lot of words. It just was a sense of being present to life, and therefore being present to God, who permeates every aspect of our life, the way she came to understand it by the end. But and one of the nice things about her is she only lived to be 24 years old. Some people, excuse me, live to be 60, 70, or 80, and everything's spread out. But because her life is so short, 24 years, all those moments and movements we all have as God is trying to transform us are all truncated really quick. In fact, remember her major confirmation transformation was when she was 12. Nobody knew it was halfway through her life. But most of us in the second half of life, we kind of wake up to God. What's going on here? There's a lot of other pieces of our life go down. So she lived in that, and it's interesting. I think the major headlines of her life, if we want to do it, are three things. One, as a kid, was I want it all. Don't we all? She wanted everything. She was somebody who had this great desire to embrace the world and enjoy everything and give herself to everything. I want it all. And it shows up in a very funny story. Leonie, who's the middle girl, who never fit in, the other four bonded with each other, but in a different way. But Leonie was going to leave again, become a nun, a visitation nun at the time. And so she brings all her girly stuff. Remember, they were upper middle class. So she's got all these ribbons and dolls, the things little girls collect. And she goes to her four sisters and says, here, I'm letting this go. I'm going to go try the convent. And they all go looking to grab, a piece of material, a doll, a ribbon, whatever. And Therese walks in and says, I want it all. And she walks away. And nobody said a damn word. Because that was her. She kind of expected all and wanted all. And they just, because that's the way they learned to live, to honor that. So that's the first thing. I want all. But it becomes a great struggle because by her Christmas conversion, when she goes to the crib, after her mother abandonment issue stuff happened about 3 years earlier, when she had to be healed by Our Lady of the Smile. The divine feminine had to cure a feminine wound in her. And so God always comes to us where we need. And she needed a feminine healing. And so the divine feminine, that smiling statue. But later is when your Christmas conversion is when she goes to the baby Jesus. It's a Christmas Eve Mass. The dad had donated the altar at the cathedral, so they had front row seats. Remember the altars were facing that way. And but right behind it was a beautiful manger scene like most churches have. And she goes over before Mass and she says, Jesus, I want to be totally for you. Nothing half-hearted here. I want to be totally for you. And she's saying it to the baby Jesus, in this little manger scene. Mass happens and they're going home. It's about 8 o'clock. Midnight Mass, typically starting at 7, that kind of stuff on Christmas Eve. And she's going, and they're getting home, and they go home to the house, and they had Mass, and she just said that. Well, she walks in the house, and the front door, and the fireplace is there. They have the only place, and she goes in, and she says, I can't wait to see what I'm going to get, in my shoes. They get Father Christmas put stuff in their shoes, and the dad, who's now frustrated, like, when is she going to grow up? What did I do? We spoiled this brat, and And so she hears it. She's very hypersensitive. She has hissy fits over everything. So she heard again, hypersensitive. She runs upstairs. And somehow in the middle of that, she has an experience. It's not an apparition, outside her, but she has a voice that says very clearly, Therese, get over yourself. It's not about you. That's what all conversion is about. We think it's all about me. It's how do you let go? Remember Jesus? Unless you let go. If you want to gain your life, you got to lose it. That stuff, which none of us understand or like. But it's true. It's charged to the gospel. Jesus ends up on the cross, not as a successful Messiah. But anyway, so she hears that, and then she gets down and she goes back and really delights her dad. Oh, look, I'm glad for this because what she gave her. So she realized she had to be for him. She had to make him happy, even though she felt hurt by him. So how do you learn to step over this stuff that, oh, why would he say something like that to me? Because basically he's saying, when are you going to grow up? Now, what we also know is it's halfway through her life. She's gonna. It's like 8 days before her 13th birthday. She's gonna be dead at 24, but nobody knows that. So the halfway thing. If you ever look at your life, there's so much study now about second half of life experience. But in hers was interesting. Get over yourself. It's not about you. And so she had to learn that. And then she's even wrestling with what did she want to. I'm sorry. That whole thing is the story of our life. I don't have time to go through it. We do it in hours and stuff. But she eventually wants to become a nun. And, they won't let her because the nuns didn't like her. She was a spoiled brat. When she came to see Pauline, she was always yelling and screaming, and especially during that time when they had the mother abandonment stuff. And so they saw her. What do we want here? They don't want her in. So Mother Gonzaga, who said no way. And so she kept saying, well, if you want to be, if God wills. So where do I go next? Well, go to the chaplain. So she goes to the Carmelite chaplain, and he says, well, knowing she's a brat, if God wills, and she gets frustrated. Where do I go next? The bishop. So he takes her to the bishop, he was the major donor. He had donated the cathedral, the altar at the cathedral. So sets that up, and she dresses up, she really tries to look older. And she goes to the bishop and says, I want to become a Carmelite nun, and you can make it happen. And he's saying, well, if God wills. Well, you can make it well. It's like, she's pushing. She's very pushy. You can make it do. And anyway, she finally gets in a little early, but she's pushing the envelope all the time. She has a funny way of doing it. Some of those awful pictures of her that were running around the 20s and 30s, she looked like some simply little person you wouldn't want to have at a cocktail party. She'd be really weird. But she was very strong. She was a strong personality. Even when she went to the Pope, remember, finally, when they go up there, they pull her away. They had to kick her away because she said, well, I want to, but she goes to the bishop, not done. Eventually, he goes with Pius XI, or Leo XIII. He's the Pope in Rome, and it's his anniversary. So there's a Dawson pilgrimage. He takes the two girls, Celine and Therese, and they're getting a lot of things. So she's in the Vatican. Well, she's scandalized by the priests there and all their pompous clothes and all that stuff. That's why she dedicated her life to priests, because she thought we were screwing it up. In this privilege thing with all the clothing and all the stuff, she was there. But anyway, eventually she gets there. She does go to the Pope and pushes it, and they pull her away. But so she finally gets in the Carmel, only like a half a year earlier. There's kind of pressure being put on. And so they finally let her in. Some of the nuns never wanted her because they had heard her screaming for years as a young girl, especially with Pauline and Marie were in there. Two of them were there. So they weren't happy about that. But she gets in there, and of course, like anything, she had idealized what life would be about. Didn't you idealize what marriage would be like, parenting and kids? And it turns out to be something different. I mean, I did. What I thought Carmelites were, and then I met all these guys, and oh my God, But because you can get the spirituality or the ideas behind it, but then the human reality of it is always something different. So it was very different. She lived, of those 22 nuns she lived with, some of them were crazy. They should have been institutionalized as they study them today. But remember, psychology hadn't happened yet. She's a contemporary of Freud, so the whole thing of analyzing, they just said, well, they're just a little strange. But they were more into suffering. See, they had bought Jansenism. The more you suffer, the more God loves you. So when she comes and she's a happy girl, oh, you're so simple. You're dumb. You don't know what life's really about. This cruel world we live in. So she's getting really turned down there. Pauline will kind of save her for a while. And eventually she doesn't get the vows at the time. The community wouldn't give her right away. So she had to fight for something. She had to trust that God was calling her. That spirituality is something. And so it was interesting. And finally, then she's looking around. And of course, she wanted to become a missionary. They were opening one in Hanoi. Remember, France had Vietnam before we got involved in it. And she wanted to go there, so she signs up. But of course, the prior said, we're not sending a sick girl over there. So one of the things she really wanted to do was denied, as her parents had been denied, one being a nun, one being a priest. There's something. So then she starts doing this, really reflecting, what am I doing here? Don't you all at times ask the question, what am I doing here? At different times of your life, whether you're successful or down or just everything's just on neutral, what am I doing here? What's my vocation? And eventually she does some interesting, because it's a lot of frustration. It was never what she thought it would be or expected it to be. And that's hard with all of us when we get disillusioned with life. When our marriage, our spouse, our kids, or our job, or the people we live with, the whole family that came with it, aren't what we wanted them to be. And how do you deal with them? Instead of, obviously, the way you deal with them is accept them for who they are, not who you need them to be. You know, that's that whole thing. That's that. What love truly is accepting people for who they are. You may want to challenge them a little bit, thinking there's more, but you know, that whole thing. But eventually she's reading enough and she comes up with my vocation is love. I know I'm going to be love in the heart of the church, which gave her a sense of purpose. You know, and she does that beautiful thing because she had been listening to the Corinthian reading, and that she'd be love in the heart of the church. And somehow she was going to try to embrace the world in her heart. That's why she wanted to know what's going on and somehow pray for them and be with them. And she had some confirming signs with Pranzini, the criminal, who finally changed, you know, after she kept praying for him. And at the last minute, he grabbed a cross and kissed it before he was beheaded. And she's, oh, it works. You know, so she thought he was being saved. So I want all. My vocation is love. And then, of course, the last thing is in the darkness, you know, because she went through a terrible dark night. And here's somebody, remember, needed to be noticed. So you've heard some of you talk. You can see it on the stairway over here. They noticed early on. If you look at Enneagram, she's a 4. They think they're special. So she needed to be noticed. She gained her value from being noticed. You know, and so anyway, it's a whole thing. So remember, as a kid, the stairs. Her mom would say, "Therese, go upstairs, say your prayers, and go to bed." And she'd go to the first step and say, "Mama, Mama." And if Mama didn't say yes, Therese, she just stayed there. But then when Mom said yes, Therese, she went to the next step and said every step up and every step down. I mean, every entrance in it. She had to be noticed. That's what gained her value. So that's an important piece. And of course, it's her mystic thing. For some of you there Sunday, talked about that flower that taught her. It's not, your being gives glory to God, not by being seen. Because we think, oh, well, if somebody gives me, but no, God sees it, and that's all that matters. You know, that whole thing. So, but then in that prison of that dark night, she's there. And the last thing she had, and of course, she was feeling the absence of God. You know, you all go through stages, and that's what this window is about on both sides, the dark night of the senses and spirit. When a lot of the things that gave you energy, life, inspiration, they were kind of the spark of your soul, don't seem to work anymore. You know, my beautiful wife is fat and still can't cook. I keep cooking, I keep kissing my husband, and he's still a toad. You know, that kind of thing. You see how people get into enduring life, not celebrating it. It's not what we thought. And she had obviously lived with some wonderful sisters and some really strange sisters who didn't like her because she was happy. She, you know, you can't be happy because that's wrong. And if it felt good, remember, it's sinful somehow. And then she just seemed so naive because she was a child. But anyway, so she gets her TB came back. I think mine's coming back. Her TB came back, and so they put her in the infirmary in July. This is 1897. Remember, she's going to die at the end of September in 1897. They took her to the infirmary there in the back because it was contagious. 4 nuns died of TB while she was there, and put her back there. So she's kind of alone and isolated. And what's even interesting, as I've been there sometimes, is, you know, when we go to hospitals and stuff, you know, you got the blue sheets and stuff around you. They had black ones. So not only was she dark, but with all the sheets around her, you know, the thing that covered her, she was looking at black all the time. You know, it was really an interesting, you know, it was dark, dark, dark. But anyway, on the 3rd week, he gave her, this chaplain gave her communion, and she spit it up. And so he says, no more. You know, we got to protect Jesus, you know, that she had vomited it up. And she's really angry because what happened was the only connection she felt. Remember, it's more experiential than thinking. The only thing she felt was that God was really reaching out to her was communion. That was the only connection she had. because he felt absent in every other way. And but that's when she turns in, and see, that's where she gained some wisdom along the way, which I think we all have to do. It's how we listen to the Spirit that dwells within us. But I'm going to talk in a minute. And so she finally says, well, it's a grace to receive the sacrament because now I know you're with me. It's a grace not to receive the sacrament because now my longing for you is even more, because everything is grace. See, not some things are grace, everything. What we understand in our Christian understanding of the incarnation of God becoming one of us in the person of Jesus, his only Son, is that he transforms the universe. It is a new age. People scream about new age. Yeah, it's new age because it was. He transformed us. I'm part of you. I live in the human experience. I live with you, in you, and around you. And so this sense of a graced world, an enchanted world, a world that God permeates everything, the ups, the downs, the joys, the sorrows, the frustrations, the hurt, the darkness, the light. And so that's her greatest teaching. So I want all. My vocation is love, and everything is grace. Those are interesting things. So you look at your own, how you respond to the call from God to be intimate with us and to dwell with us, and how you awaken to that presence that is always present deep within you. You know, we developed even our own Catholicism sign that we could get rid of God. Remember mortal sin? He'd disappear. He said, I'm always with you. Oh, but it's a mortal sin. He's gone. Who decided that? Jesus said, I will always be with you. You know, so we got more into the sin side of it as opposed to the grace side of it. And she really caught that. She was very good about that. So what's interesting, and I think one of the interesting pieces, which I was fascinated with, because I got to know it, and you'll see if you go in the museum, that first thing there is, when she was a young girl, remember, this is an age of invention. So cameras are new, you know, photography, and elevators, you know, the things were just coming up. And so you remember she's born there. So it's in the 1880s. So he takes her to the big city, and what she saw was an elevator. They were going to go to a hotel. And instead of climbing the stairs, she saw you hit a thing, and it took you up there. Wow, I like this. No work. So she starts talking about Jesus becoming an elevator. She wants an easy way out. You remember, that's what she said there. I want something to go straight to heaven. So it would take him. So she said, we live in an age of inventions. We need no longer to climb the flight of stairs with great effort. I am determined to find an elevator to carry me to Jesus. In other words, she wanted an easy way, like we all do, don't we? Is there an easy way to be present to God? Or do we have to go through all sort of limestones and stuff? Because then in Holy Scriptures, she said, I sought an elevator I wanted, and it said, whoever is a little one, let them come to me. In other words, she realized that smallness, which is a sense of humility, a sense of poverty. You know, we're all about power, prestige, and privilege and plenty, aren't we? Remember, that's what Jesus was wrestling with in the desert. She had to learn that it wasn't about her. It wasn't about the power she had to affect the community. Even she couldn't change herself sometimes. Power, privilege, prestige, and plenty. That it became an empty thing, something empty. And there, so here's a girl who was keeping track of all this stuff. And suddenly she realized it doesn't matter. God loves us because God loves us, you know. I think I said at Mass, it's an interesting, we have developed a funny theology that God will love us if we're good. I think you all heard that. I think the Catechism used to say that. And yet, what's the good news? God loves us because God is good, period. He loves us in spite of everything. And I think we forget that sometimes. We still think, well, I got to do something. I've got to earn it. I got to deserve it. You know, I'm not worthy. So interesting. So she went, and that developed into her little way spirituality, because she had a simplicity with some of the nuns thing. But then remember, they made her a novice mistress because she seemed to have something, and of course her sister had something to do with that. And she wanted to teach them to pray. The best way to learn what you understand is teach catechism or teach something. You know, you really absorb it. So in doing it, she had to start explaining to the novices, and she had about 7 or 8 during those years, about this simplicity about just being present to life. Every breath, every experience. You know, we say, well, go to church and go kneel before the Blessed Sacrament, you know, all this other stuff. No, just be present to life as it comes to us. This God is engaging us at every second, every breath, every experience of our life. And so she's teaching them to do that. Well, for a lot of those nuns, it was crazy. They thought this God was angry and pissed off. Why would he be with them? It's your imaging of God. And the other thing is, this God really has a sense of intimacy with us and wants to be intimate. You don't hear that a lot. And but you know what? You never let anybody near you or intimate with you if you're afraid of them. Which is why most people don't feel close to God, because we were taught to be fear. If we're afraid of him, what he's going to do. And see, that's where she broke through that very powerfully. That little way. And it's just about doing little things. And she showed it up. I'm sorry. Well, it showed up. Well, she had some difficult nuns there. And one of them was Sister St. Pierre. Some people don't age well. This old nun was there forever. Some of the nuns, they live forever, it seems like. Well, when they were all novices, they all had to take care of Sister St. Pierre. She needed help, but nothing was good enough for her. She needed her tea at 4 o'clock. She needed to be taken to the infirmary or to the evening prayer and stuff, and then she had to be taken, and she wanted to get into the dining room before everybody else, and they get their thing. And so she drove everybody crazy. So nobody could last more than a month. But when Therese, and it's an interesting thing, she decides, well, I'm going to take her on. Nobody wanted to deal with her because she's bitching. You're too fast, you're too slow, you're hot and cold. You could never do it right. I think you've all met some of those people sometimes. So she took her. So much so that, and just kept thinking, well, it's a child of God. I may not like the artwork, but the artist likes to be praised. That God who is sustaining us and working in us and creating us, who is always present deep within us. And so, so much so that by the 8 months, she goes to the previous prioress and says, what's wrong with that girl? See, she had run everybody down in a way. Couldn't deal with the fact that she just smiled back at her. She didn't let her constant negativity affect her. And that's where that's the thing. And I think what you learn in spirituality is she understood that the center of who she was the blessedness of God, the presence of God. Carmelites come from that. Elijah, our founder, God lives in whose presence I stand. That we live in the presence. You hear, I always start Mass that way, be present to the presence deep within you. Because it's always there. We all miss that. I'm thinking, what am I doing here? What's going on here? Or what do I do? And what are the kids doing? So I think it's this sense of understanding a presence deep within. And she knew that, and she learned that. Now, many of the sisters didn't. They were kind of thinking, well, that's crazy. You have to do this, this, and this for God to like you. And that's why they didn't. Even when after she died, a couple of the nuns voted, and they interviewed everybody who knew her. Dumb. She was crazy. She was too simple. She didn't understand God. She didn't understand the real world, that kind of stuff she was doing. It was really weird. But see, she trusted it. And I think one of the things, and I think I said it the other day, but one of the other pieces of that was when she had her she had a mother abandonment issue, 3 mothers. Her biological mother, Rose Taillet, her wet nurse, and then Pauline, all leaving her at one point. And she goes, so she has this huge mother abandonment issue. And so she goes into hissy fits for about 9 months. And nobody could do it. Doctors, they thought she was dying. She broke out in hives. She was awful. She even writes about it. She was terrible. Brought out the worst in her. But on Pentecost Sunday, which was May 14th that year, Feast of the Spirit, they were all praying because the doctor said she's not going to live anymore. She was emaciated. She was, crazy. And so they were praying for her, and they prayed they had the statue of Mary Victorious. It's be Our Lady of Grace. It was like we call it Our Lady of Lourdes today, the lady who made it. And so she says, well, she's there. Well, it was interesting. And this part of and I said it again Sunday, but it's real. Because I think it's something we all need to learn from her, to trust her experience. So she gets up, she feels good. They don't trust her, So they decide to go up to the Carmel. And all the nuns come out because she's healed, she's healed. So Pauline's there with the nuns, and they're behind a grill. Have you ever been to the cloister? Behind a grill, and she says, What happened? What happened? She smiled at me. Who smiled at you? Our Lady smiled at me, Mary Victorious. Are you sure? Because she'd been hallucinating a lot during all those times, We all live in our imagination sometimes. So then what's hard? So she's looking for some confirmation. We all want to think God is always coming to us, but most of us swallow it, ignore it, walk away from it, or dismiss it. Well, anyway, so Pauline's trying to get what's happened to you. I don't know. She just smiled at me. Really? Well, 2 nuns screw it up. One of the nuns that she knew says, well, did she have her, you want to find, did she have her blue sash? Mary always has like one outfit with a blue sash on it. And she says, I don't know. I just know she smiled at me. And then the other one says, well, she had her gold shoes on. Mary always shows up with her gold shoes, and she said, I don't know. And so Pauline says to her, this is all behind the grill, are you sure? You sure to make this up? But she had to trust that God really upped her. And it did. It saved her life to get over the key wound that God came to her where she needed it, because she had a mother wound. It comes as the divine feminine. But to trust it when the people you count on to confirm it that you're crazy. That's why, most people, if you're taking spirituality seriously, and she learned that too, you got to have someone who will listen to you and be honest with you. Who might say, are you sure? Why do you think it's God? Because there's a lot of right-wing stuff going on, and people, it's more their security needs, I swear, as opposed to this God who's moving us into the future. So I think her spirituality is about embracing life as it is, not as we wish it could be. The person we are, one of it is just that part of it. It's accepting who God made me to be. Warts and all. Even now, as I sit there, I've had a pretty blessed life, but, lately, even now, with my back's going out and getting old, and I'm thinking, and he said, you, I keep thinking, well, can you fix me? Well, he's not fixing me. So I get kind of pissed off, but accept life for what it is. Don't be fighting life. Accept life and say, where are you here, God? See, that's what she did. Where are you? And there's a sense of presence. And that's why, if you listen to her more and more, she gets away from all this wordy stuff. She makes this big thing about words, as Jesus did, remember? She took him serious. When he says, stop babbling on like the pagans. When you pray, go to your inner room and be still and be with God. Which is really prayer as listening. Listen to God. Most of us are so uncomfortable with silence. And that's what she was trying to teach the novices. Because the sisters would say, well, you got to say all these prayers, you got to do this. Well, yeah, but where's the quiet time? Where's the time when you're still and God can get into the conversation? We are often telling God how to be God. And you think, well, I know how to be God. Here's the things you better know about this, you better know about that. But this issue of silence, which for a lot of people feels like wasted. You do things. I've been fighting with things at the Mass there. I said 20 seconds. Well, the first day they did 6, and I said 20. See, some people some people got antsy. Stay there for 20 seconds. It's amazing group silence, Phil, even not just silence within yourself, but silence in a group. It has this contagious effect to bring you in. And that's what she's teaching a lot, is much more listening to God, not trying to be control of it. Now here's somebody, I want it all. My vocation is love, and even sometimes love can be manipulated. Instead of doing what is best for the other, it's doing what makes me, and so you'll like me. You can turn it around. And then everything's grace, which means this whole world is great, is permeated by the presence of God. The divine fingerprints are everywhere. We just have to awaken to it. We don't have to make it happen. It's always happened. It's always there. But sometimes we have to awaken and say, where were you? And therefore listen to it. Paul Darcy, one of the great mystics today, always said, God comes to us disguised as our life. It sounds strange, doesn't it? But ultimately it is. The best way to pray sometimes, and especially when you get in the second half of life, and I'm well into it, I'm in the 4th quarter at this, is relive your life. Relive some of those moments that traumatized you, that excited you, that made you feel loved, disappointed, just go back and listen to them again and relive them from where you are today. It's amazing. I always tell this story. I grew up, my dad was a sixth grade education. I'm a second child, but the oldest boy. And so he was very hard on me uh, because education ruined his career. I mean, he worked hard for Stanley, worked for 30 years, but he never got the corporate job because you had to have a BS degree and he had sixth grade education. And he came over. So he was there. So he was very hard on me and saying, you know, and all he'd ever say is, when I come home with my 4 A's and a B, all he'd ever say is, why'd you get a B? So you start thinking you're inadequate. So I start developing an image of myself. Well, it's a false image. God doesn't even know that person. And see, somehow that issue of living, and it's taken me a long time to go on a lot of places, to go inside. Because the nice thing about what happened to me, because I was inadequate, I was always proving myself to everybody. So I got everything done real well. I become messianic in my own mind. Even do it better than God. You know, you tell him what he should be doing, and then you go do it yourself, saying, you're never going to do it, are you? So I did it, and that's why I was so successful in a lot of ways. The Carmelites loved me because I did all that stuff. But boy, I had to learn to let go of that. But I'm in my 50s and trying to wake up to the beloved of God. And part of it came from remembering the things. See, my dad wasn't the kind that said, I love you, I love you, I love you, but as he was dying, I was home one day, and we were selling the house, and we put my mom in a home, and he was in a hospital. So I went back a few times. He lives in Connecticut, and he was always in bed or sitting in a chair. Well, I'm going to leave. I got to come back. We sold it, and so I went to see my dad, and I walked in, and he wasn't in his room. Always in the community room. So I walk over there, and there's all these people there, and I'm looking, Dad, and then this lady says, "Only family in here." I said, I'm Quinto's son, Bob. Oh, I didn't know that. I've been on vacation. Okay. Well, he heard me say, I'm Bob, Quinto's son. And he screamed, that's Father Bob, my son. But you know what? I was so paralyzed watching him in a wheelchair. And now these days I'm ending up in wheelchairs a lot more. I was so paralyzed, I didn't hear it. All I said, am I going to end up in a wheelchair? It was about me. I remember driving home thinking, is that what I'm going to be like? Several years later, I was on the men's rite of passage, and I found out it was the day, August 5th, that I had celebrated his funeral. And it hit me, you know, my God, this is Dad. And so I said to him at one point out in the woods, after a 36-hour fast and, you know, spending time in the woods, because nature is an incredible way to help you be, not to do. And I remember that, and but I just said, Dad, was I ever good enough? And then, you know what came back? 3 years earlier, what he had said, he had screamed it. And I missed it. That's Father Bob, my son, with the biggest smile. But I missed it. But 3 years later, I found it. Well, that opened up, that ripped up anything through me, you know, this inadequate thing. And then the sky opened up. God was smiling at me, and I merged with the universe. I don't know whether it lasted for 5 seconds, 5 minutes, or 5 hours. But you had that experience. You never forget it. Because I came out believing I was beloved of God, not an inadequate son. And those are kind of the experiences. And sometimes I have to go back there because it still surfaces. Sometimes we have these attitudes in our head, and she had to get through it. When Jesus said, if you want to gain your life, you need to lose it. The life, a lot of times, is who you think you are, not who God knows you are. And that you have to let go of it. And I think she's very good on that. You know, if you listen to her, especially toward the end. So that to me probably is the critical thing, is how do you get to be your best self, which is what God knows. When God sees you, you're my beloved daughter, your beloved son, you're my dwelling place. Not religion that tells you, oh, you're sinful, you don't belong here. You know, I love people that come after Mass, after going to communion, and they say, can I go to confession? You just went. He just gave you himself. What are you doing? Well, I'm still sinful. You know, we don't believe God's incredible, seductive, and ever-present love. It's a seductive love in its always and already present. A lot of hierarchials, and we're not alone in this. It happens in every religion. We'll never believe that because they're going to, oh no, I know how to get you there. It's a job security issue. You have to go through me. What about God directly dealing with me? You know, well, I can get you there quicker. You know, so I think you have to look at. So that is okay. So going. So that's kind of what her spirituality is about. It's really about presence. How do you live life? Watch yourself a day. What did you miss so many times? Like a very practical thing. When you got up this morning, did you take a shower? What did the water feel like? Did you have soap? What did you do? Most of you probably didn't. You just did it. We do things, or you brushed your teeth. You know, we're not even attentive to what's going on. And see, her little way is be attentive to everything. Be attentive to everything. And you'll be attentive then to the God who dwells deep within us. That's the real presence of God. You don't hear that a lot, because then you don't need me. But you listen to Therese of Avila, Therese of Lisieux, John of the Cross, the great Carmelite mystics. He's already there. And that's what she grabs. See, she was named after Therese of Avila, you know, the interior castle and how you get in there. But she's really John of the Cross, who had to deal with the darkness and disappointment of life. That's what this Windows here is about. It's John of the Cross, okay? Does that make sense? Any questions or concerns? You're saying